What is going on, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back to review episode 6 of Star Trek Picard season 3, an episode called The Bounty, for reasons that should be obvious to anybody who has seen the episode. So if you have not seen the episode, go do so, because I will be going into spoilers, or at least as many spoilers as I can, because this episode was overflowing with a lot of details that are going to make longtime fans just do cartwheels, whether you like the motion pictures that were based on the original crew or classic episodes of The Next Generation. But what was making my ability to transcribe all these details even more difficult, last night I was determined to go to bed early so that I could get up early, watch this show, and then review it. So I took half of an Advil PM. And you would have thought that I'd been chugging like Romulan ale for hours and hours, because I slept not only for like 5 or 6 hours real hard, but I'm still a little off just with the side effects or the hangover from once again, half a pill. But I'm chugging coffee, trying to counteract the effects, which isn't making me like alert. It's just making me like wired and confused all at once. Long story short, if I miss a few details, it's because I'm on drugs. But at any rate, let's get into this episode. But before I go any further, I do have to give a shout out and a thank you to the Popcast brothers, because earlier this week they invited me on a live stream to interview Star Trek writer Matt Okamura, who wrote the upcoming episode 8 of the season. And it was a really fun conversation, just getting to hear all the behind the scenes about how a writer's room works, like what does a story editor do once they've been handed the reins of a particular episode. But what was a huge thrill about this episode, or this live stream, is I got to talk with Robert Meyer Burnett. And if not for Robert Meyer Burnett, I would not be watching this season of television, because I decided to let Star Trek, or at least New Trek, drift out of my life. But a couple months ago, he started ranting and raving about how good this season was. So I just eased back into things, and I've been absolutely loving the ride. So it was great to be able to thank him more or less face-to-face for getting me back into Star Trek. So I will leave a link to that live stream in the description of this episode. And if you want a 3-hour conversation about Star Trek, have at it. So where to begin with this episode, which saw so many reunions and so many flashbacks to past movies and episodes. And like I said before, it was a little overwhelming at times, just because I was just totally caught off guard by just this tidal wave of just unbridled Star Trek that was washing over me. But I guess what this episode more than anything got me thinking about was what could have been if we had gotten this season a couple of years earlier. Like, imagine if New Trek had decided to begin with this season. I mean, obviously, science fiction nerds love to talk about hypothetical scenarios and alternate timelines and that sort of thing. But I'm just glad we're getting this season when we've gotten it, because who knows, not to be pessimistic, this might be the only great season of Star Trek that we will ever see again. If I have my way, all the survivors of this season will reunite with showrunner Terry Matalas and do another season. Imagine a season of television aboard the Titan with 7 of 9 and Captain Shaw and Jack. I don't know if Jack's going to survive or not, but imagine if you got Sidney LaForge and all these characters, put them on a ship, and send them off into space without any of the Next Generation crew. I feel like the Next Generation crew is doing a great job of handing the baton to a bunch of new characters. And I'm invested in a lot of these new characters, and I feel like there's so much potential for what the future might hold. So at any rate, I'm rambling. Let's dive into The Bounty. First and foremost, let's give credit where credit is due. The episode was written by Christopher Monfett and directed by Dan Liu. I'm not quite sure how he pronounces his last name, but when I saw that the episode was called The Bounty, I totally forgot about the Klingon bird of prey from the movies. I immediately started thinking of the old-fashioned movie Mutiny on the Bounty. I prefer the Charles Lawton Clark Gable one, but some people like the version with friggin' Marlon Brando from the 60s, and some people really like the version with Anthony Hopkins and Daniel Day-Lewis. But it got me thinking, if you ever wanted to make a brilliant movie set in the Star Trek universe that was a totally kind of self-contained little storyline, you could remake Mutiny on the Bounty and just change all the good old-fashioned traditional ships into starships, and you would have the beginnings of a really extraordinary science fiction film. And I feel like when Star Trek leans into military decorum and lingo, etc. and so forth, that's where Star Trek tends to shine. So I'm just throwing that out there in case anybody wants to take that $1 million idea and run with it. But the main thrust of this episode is all about the Titan, which is on the run, and they're leaving all these little decoy transponders around space, and the episode opens up with the Shrike finding one of these little decoys, whereupon Vadic starts to have a little meltdown. But it was great seeing all these old actors who are in their late 60s and early 70s now, and in some cases in their 80s, just embracing that good old-fashioned rebellious streak. Because with Frontier Day only 72 hours away, and this very mysterious plot that's going to get more or less like all of Starfleet in one place at one time, the heroes of our story are trying to get aboard the Daystrom station to figure out what was actually stolen from Daystrom station. Like, obviously the portal weapon is dangerous, but that was all a ruse. That was a misdirect to hide their true intentions. And as a result of this undercover mission, it sets in motion one of the best reunions in sci-fi history, because the band is more or less together from the Next Generation now. I mean, obviously there was a giant cast on the Next Generation over the years, but now almost all the key characters are back together, and I had no idea just how much I needed to see this reunion. I mean, Next Generation started when I was 11 years old, so this crew and these actors and these characters have been a part of my life for a very, very long time. And like I said before, I was just kind of overwhelmed by the experience, not realizing just how much it would mean to me seeing all these characters back on the screen together. But I'm thinking, rather than trying to recap the episode blow by blow and just giving the official synopsis, I think instead I'm just going to focus on the details and the scenes that really meant a lot to me. And I like seeing the evolution of the relationship between Jack and Picard, and we learn that Jack is suffering from a syndrome that he inherited from his father. He's got a terminal diagnosis, and Beverly's given him some pills to help with the hallucinations, but it was cool seeing them have a little, reconciliation toward the end, where Jack acknowledges, while I got many traits from my mother, I also got many of my best traits from you. And I like how Jack has got a little devilish, mischievous quality, and probably his best moment of all episode, when he and Seven of Nine are gazing in admiration at all these ships that have been tucked away at this museum supervised by LaForge. And for people who know their Star Trek history, or for those people particularly who obsess over the various models of the various ships, I'm sure they were doing absolute cartwheels. And of course, justifiably, Jack is a big fan of the Enterprise from the original series, but it was cool getting to see Seven of Nine reminiscing about the Voyager. And I've never really liked that model of the Voyager. It looks like a big ice cream scooper. But as they're gazing at these ships, Jack gets this idea related to the HMS Bounty, which was pulled from the bottom of San Francisco Bay. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Star Trek IV is still the most commercially successful Star Trek film if you adjust for inflation. I might have those numbers wrong. Maybe it's the most successful of the 6 movies starring the original crew. In any event, that movie came out when I was 10 years old, and I absolutely loved and adored it. And I totally understand how a lot of people look at Star Trek 2, 3, and 4 as basically one giant movie or one giant saga. But as much as I enjoy 2, 3, and 4, I think of all the 6 movies starring the original crew, I still think motion picture might be the strongest, or at least it's the weirdest. I mean, it's the 70s. It feels like, for me, it's the most that feels like one of those classic weird standalone episodes from the late 60s. But I got a lot of love for the 6 movies as well, but we're not here to discuss the movies of the original crew. Let's get back on task. At any rate, Jack and Sydney get together and decide to steal the cloaking technology from the Bounty and place it aboard the Titan, and they're kind of screwing it up when they're trying to install it, but of course, the great LaForge himself steps in to finish the job. And I guess that was one of my favorite parts of this episode, of seeing Sydney help her father rediscover the man that he once was, the man who used to follow Jean-Luc Picard, basically anywhere in the galaxy, just irrespective of the dangers, and just diving headlong into some of the craziest adventures imaginable. And I have to say, LeVar Burton, he's remarkably well preserved for an actor of advanced years. I mean, apart from the gray hair, he looks and sounds almost the exact same as they did in the late 80s. But speaking of reconciliations between parents and their children, this episode gave us Mika Burton as Ensign Alondra LaForge, and we get to see how there's a lot of friction between Sydney and her father, because as she expresses over the course of the episode, she did not want to grow up to be someone who designs and builds incredible ships. She wanted to fly them. However, she loved and adored all of her time working on various projects with her father growing up. But when you're seeing LaForge interacting with Picard, or you're seeing LaForge's eyes light up when he sees his old friend Data, I mean, that was one of the best parts about those early seasons of Next Generation, was watching LaForge and Data having all these adventures, facing off against Professor Moriarty. And I know a lot of the movies leaned into the relationship between Picard and Data, but so many of those classic episodes of The Next Generation were all about LaForge helping Data understand the environment in which he was operating, or understanding the world in which he was living. And I know I'm jumping around quite a bit without any real rhyme or reason, but there was just so much to sink our teeth into. And speaking of this classic adventures with LaForge and Data, this episode gave us the return of Professor Moriarty, and I knew he was coming at some point during the season, so I actually recently revisited the episode Ship in a Bottle from Season 6, Episode 12 of The Next Generation, which is still a damn good episode, but obviously the character was first introduced in Elementary Dear Data, which was the 3rd episode of the 2nd season. In any event, if you want to have a sentimental journey to the good old days where LaForge and Data were having to solve unsolvable problems, go back and revisit those episodes. They hold up real fucking well. But if I were to offer one criticism of this episode, it would be that they didn't quite fully exploit Moriarty to their full advantage as far as being like the security system at Daystrom Station is concerned. I feel like he was such an astonishing adversary on the show, and so brilliant and so diabolical and so maniacal. I feel like perhaps this episode was a little overstuffed, where they couldn't fully exploit what that character could bring to the table. And speaking of this episode being overstuffed, when you've got Riker and Worf and Raffi exploring Daystrom Station, they keep stumbling into all these weapons and artifacts that have been tucked away, including Genesis from Wrath of Khan, but even like Captain Kirk's body is on Daystrom Station. I have no idea why his body is there. And more importantly, as we learn at the very end of the episode, the original human remains of Jean-Luc Picard were also in Daystrom Station. I have no idea why the changelings would feel the need to snag his body, but they did all the same. But of all the great scenes this episode, and all the great flashbacks and all the great reunions, there was only one scene where I got chills, and that was when Mr. Worf boards the Titan, and he describes Picard's gifts of wine in the past as sour mead. And anyway, just a little bit of humor goes a long way, or just a great dramatic moment. But I feel like, if of all the people who've been well served this season, I feel like Mr. Worf is getting a lot of great scenes. Like at the very end, when he tells Picard after Riker's been taken, he has this incredible line which I had to write down. He says, "I will find him, Admiral. I will bring William Riker home, and fearful be the god or man or beast that stands him away." I mean, in spite of all of his protests about being a pacifist, Worf is still tucked away inside, and goddamn, if you get on his bad side, your head will roll. And Worf had another brilliant line when 7 of 9 and Raffi were having a little interaction, and whether or not 7 of 9 is going to be joining them on the mission, and Worf kind of assesses what's going on between them and just says, "Breakups on my homeworld seldom end without bloodshed." Made me kind of wonder, like, what would happen if 7 of 9 and Raffi were to throw down. But anyway, Worf, he has been pure comedy gold, and also a total badass this entire season. But another great little detail that jumped out at me was early in the episode, where we see Captain Shaw hanging out in the room where you've got Worf, Picard, and Crusher, and everybody talking and interacting and strategizing. And I imagine for actor Todd Stashwick, he must have just been periodically pinching himself like, am I really here with all these badasses from all these different seasons of Star Trek? Because I think it's becoming abundantly clear that Todd Stashwick now is a new fan favorite. Like, it's all well and good when the movies and the shows, remind us of the greatness of Star Trek in the past, but it's equally important, perhaps even more important, that Star Trek introduces new characters that we can get invested in for future seasons, future movies, and obviously Captain Shaw. He's made a massive impact this season. So yes, Todd Stashwick, man, He must feel like the luckiest man alive, just getting to share the scene with all these legends and just knowing that they are more or less kind of passing the baton to another generation of, hopefully, future Star Trek legends. But of all the things that happened in this episode, it's tough to beat the return of Data or Lore or B4 or a combination of all the above. I mean, Data's been destroyed twice now. Even I did not watch the last 3 episodes of season 1 of Picard, and I didn't watch season 2 at all, so I have no idea what went down with the character on that show. But obviously he was destroyed in Nemesis, but now you basically have like a hybrid of all the different versions of him that are functioning as the defense system aboard Daystrom Station. And when he recognizes Riker, that's where he almost kind of starts working against himself in order to make things easier for them. But it seems like Data now has more or less like a human positronic body, similar to the synthetic body that Picard is in. And all of his personalities, instead of integrating, are kind of like in these walled-off gardens where they're all competing for control, which makes it very difficult to speak to him or get any information out of him. But it's through Data that we learn that it was the body of Picard that was taken. And I wish I had some major brainbuster or some great zinger or some great astonishing idea or theory as to why the changelings need Picard's body, but clearly it's a key component of their master plan. And speaking of their master plan, obviously Deanna Troi is a big part of that. But during the battle on Daystrom, Riker sacrifices himself to give the rest of the team time to get Data out of there. And when he gets hit by a transport inhibitor, preventing his ability to be beamed out of there, initially I was a little frustrated because I was thinking to myself, oh damn, like the reunion will be incomplete because slowly but surely everybody's getting aboard the Titan. But Riker obviously is not going to be there. But at the time, I totally neglected to think about the fact that Troi is not back yet either. So it's going to give Riker something to do aboard the Shrike. Long story short, this writing staff, they've made me a believer again. They've made me a Star Trek fan again. If you'd asked me a year ago if I would be looking forward to future episodes of Star Trek, I would have laughed in your face. But now, not only am I looking forward to future episodes of Star Trek, I'm rooting hard to get another season of some kind, assuming that Terry Matalas and his crew can get the band back together. And more important than anything, this season has gotten me watching classic episodes of Star Trek again. I mean, I've been watching episodes related to the Dominion War in Deep Space Nine, which was referenced in this episode when they talk about the virus and the cure that were created by Starfleet that was given to the changelings. But they've got me watching episodes of The Next Generation again, and at a time where so many major franchises seem mishandled or going in the wrong direction or just adrift or falling sideways, whether you're talking about Lord of the Rings of Power, or some of the problems over at Star Wars, or some of the problems over at Marvel, or the chaos over at DC. It just seems like so many franchises are in trouble these days. It's nice to have Star Trek just kicking ass and giving us something to be excited about week after week after week. But at this point, I feel like I officially am totally rambling. I don't know if any of this video made any sense. I apologize if this video's been all over the place. I'm in a weird place where I've got sedatives and stimulants interacting with each other, but also an episode that was so overflowing with so many details. I don't know if I made any sense at all. Long story short, I love the episode. I really enjoyed it. I can't wait to see what comes next, but I'm going to wrap this video up because I'm just losing my mind at this point, and I still need to edit this thing, and then I'm going back to bed. I think that's the best thing that can happen at this point. So thank you for sticking with me throughout the course of this video. And if you enjoyed it on some level, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, hitting that notification bell. I promise to be much more clear-headed next week. I think my new solution is going to be just pull a fucking all-nighter. Stay up all night, watch it at 3, then review it. That's much easier for me than waking up early. I am not a morning person at all. I am a night owl. I like staying up till 5 in the morning. I do not like getting up at 3 in the morning. So I think, moving forward for the last 4 episodes, it's time to just pull some all-nighters and go all in. But thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. But more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.